Hello and welcome to a bit of a last minute Ukraine War update extra video with myself, Jonathan Emmett Spears on ATP Geopolitics. This is a video where I give you the extra nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the Ukraine war. So what nuggets are there? Well, let's start with a pretty horrible thing, actually. Although these guys look pretty calm about it. This is, as the Lviv Journal says, hell, probably an airstrike with white phosphorus bombs. Ukrainian soldiers seem calm, so no casualties. We hope not. But here is quite a hellscape, and this is an incredible scene of flaming fields just outside of where these guys are stationed. Yeah, pretty incredible footage there, and horrible to have been caught in that, one would assume. Next thing, Russia's gains in Solidar Bakhmut offensive since December the 1st compared to all of Ukraine. Green areas territory gained, yellow circles where Bakhmut and Solidar are located. And I think the idea of this is to give you some idea of the huge success that Bakhmut area has given the Russians. They are obviously shouting a lot about it, but it's about getting it in context. If Putin still has maximalist intentions of Ukraine, in other words, taking this entire country, then that kind of victory, if you can call it that, at the cost that it has given to the Russian capacity or capability, capacity is it's not good enough if you are hoping for those maximalist intentions. So that's useful context there. Um, if you're a big fan of Tucker Carlson, it's probably worth knowing that the Russians really like him. Drobnitsky had only one exception. In our country, we embrace one true American we wouldn't want to kill. So they basically kill all other Americans, and that would be Tucker Carlson. So apart from Tucker Carlson, so yeah, uh, if the propagandists in Russia are saying this guy is our guy, then he's probably not the guy to listen to, at least on what he thinks of the Ukraine war. Okay, moving on. This is pretty amazing. You're starting to see these a lot more. A Lancet kamikaze drone was unable to hit its target due to this anti-drone grid. So what they do is they can put mesh and stuff above. In this case, it's an SPG by the looks of it. And it caught the Lancet drone, and the Lancet drone got caught in that and didn't explode and saved the SPG. So that, I mean, that looks like a bit of a bit of protection, but actually really effective, it seems, in protecting the equipment from loitering drones. Fantastic. Next thing, uh, we know, I've reported on this, that Ukraine suffers with corruption. I mean, every country suffers with corruption, right? Ukraine has had a pretty um, close history, uh, uh, an interesting and very checkered history with corruption. It was very high on the corruption index going into sort of 2014 and onwards. Zelensky's one of his main intentions when he came to power was to eradicate or really tackle corruption. And there have been huge strides made. They got the right intentions. They were starting to put things in place, and then the war started. But during the war, obviously, there are going to be great opportunities for people to do what people do, sadly, which is in this case corruption. We've seen gross corruption through the Russian ranks in the military and trillions of rubles. They have been complaining about, where's that gone? The Russians, since they don't appear to have very many T-90 tanks and there's no T-14 Armatas and, so on and so forth. Where's all their equipment? Turns out that that money's gone largely in the pockets of people in the Russian military. You've also got this in Ukraine. So the cabinet of ministers dismissed Vasily Lozinsky from the post of deputy minister for the development of communities, territories, and infrastructure. Earlier, Lozinsky was detained on suspicion of taking $400,000 in bribes and corruption. So the good news is that that's happening, as in not the corruption, but these guys being found and something being done about it. So one of the biggest deterrents that people often think here, I'm going to go a bit on psychology philosophy here. People often think that so three elements to crime and punishment. One is retribution. It's kind of pointless in philosophy. So retribution doesn't really have a place in modern philosophy, I would argue. Um, Then you have rehabilitation, and then you have deterrence. So you punish people to deter them. And it turns out that harsh punishments, so threatening to cut off someone's hand if they steal something, doesn't actually affect, or only very marginally, not statistically significantly, affects people's behavior in crime. So you think, oh, let's make really harsh punishments. People have a natural feeling of invincibility. So you have these kind of fallacies of invincibility, these heuristics in your mind that you think, oh, there may be really harsh punishments, but I'm never going to get caught. So actually, the biggest effect on deterrence is the perception of being caught. So if you're going to go and steal a loaf of bread in a shop and you think I've got 99.9% chance of being caught, you're not going to steal a loaf of bread from that shop. It's not maybe the morality of it that's going to stop you, that's going to veto your action. It's not the harsh punishment. You're going to get your hand cut off. That's not going to stop me. But if I'm pretty sure I'm going to get caught, then that might stop me, or is far more likely to stop me. So in a case like this, what you want are these investigations to be really effective, so that people are seen to be caught and done in, so that this will act as a deterrence. Like if there's now a strong chance of me getting caught and being done for this, then it's not worth my while doing it. So that's really what you want to happen. So you want a culture of people being investigated and found guilty to start affecting people's behaviours, and that would be something positive going forward. But yeah, it's really good news that is happening. They're being found out. Not so great that the corruption is happening, of course. Okay, going on to a whole bunch of translations of what Russians are saying that give you a really great insight into the psyche of the Russians and also the state of their forces. So this one is the psyche of Russian fighters here. Russian war reporter from Russian state TV Alexander Sladkov promotes famous Russian Nazi Alexei Milchekov, who says that Ukrainians must be destroyed so they can't raise children. So I will read out to you what this soldier says. And how do you feel about Ukrainians? To begin with, I believe that Ukrainians as a nation do not exist. That's your classic talking point. Like, Ukraine doesn't exist. It's just a part of Russia, and anyone that thinks they are is some kind of brainwashed Russian. They are just Russians who've got it wrong. So this is what he says. They are brainwashed Russians who see themselves differently. I think that the enemy must be destroyed, because only dead do not shoot you in the back, and won't raise children that will take up arms and avenge their parents. Why would they feel they need to avenge their parents? Oh, because you've shot them. That's it. Yeah. Are you talking about the? Sorry, that's me. That's me adding that bit in case you're just listening to that. Are you talking? So to continue what he says, are you talking about the enemy or the entire Ukrainian nation? Ukrainian people, like I said, they are brainwashed people that has been told for many years that they are a separate nation. There should be full de-Ukrainization, because from the ethnical side, we do not differ from each other. The differences were imposed over the last 100 years. And this is him in an earlier piece of video footage saying, I am a Nazi. Literally, I am a Nazi. This is the same guy. I am a Nazi. I won't go into details like nationalists, patriots, imperialistic direction, and so on. I say straightforward, I am a Nazi. The hand, what's his last thing he says? The hand can be thrown. So here we have an actual Nazi going to fighting for the Russian forces here, and they're saying that they are de-Nazifying Ukraine, and you've got a self-admitted Nazi saying, "I want to commit basically genocide against Ukrainians." Yeah, just kill them so they can't raise children. Oh dear. Anyway, I'm not going to play you any of these intercepts, but I'm just going to read you what Dmitry War translated, who basically spends all his days translating videos into English so people can read the subtitles for these, and they're fascinating. I've read a bunch of them to you before. These are all interesting videos, but I don't have time to go through them all. So here are the summaries. The five, I think I've got five different. No, if I haven't, yes, I have. There are five here. So this first intercept is or Moldovan man who says the newly formed mobilized unit in Ulyanovsk has 30 wounded soldiers before even reaching Ukraine due to drunken fights, overdoses, and frostbite. So things are not good in these mobilized units being put together. There's a lot of discontent. There's a lot of fighting and poor equipment, and people getting frostbite because they've got poor equipment. Okay, the second intercept, and there's obviously more detail in the phone call, but second intercept, the summary is Russian woman tells a soldier about the new wave of mobilization, saying all those with military experience or on contracts are called up, even those who have had recent surgeries to boost up personnel numbers. It's the idea that the mobilization is happening already. People are getting called up. It hasn't been called publicly, but this has been going on for weeks, possibly months. And in fact, indeed, some argue it's never stopped since the last partial mobilization. They just officially closed it, but they were still mobilizing people. Third one, Russian soldier is shocked by the number of casualties in his unit. He believed he was going to a quote resort. Lack of equipment means all they can do is survive under heavy mortar shelling. So they're basically their daily objectives are to survive being shelled, and that's that. They don't have equipment to do otherwise, particularly, and he can't believe the number of casualties. So lots of dead, lots of wounded. He says in his call. The fourth one here: Russian soldier asks his family for news, hoping to be rotated in February. To which a woman responds by saying this is not happening. So he's not getting rotated as he thought he would be. She also says how a group of Russian soldiers retreated back to Russia with machine guns and surrendered to police in the Moscow region. So there's a lot of discontent in these mobilized units, and some of them are deserting. But the problem is the cost of desertion. I mean, it's not as bad as with Wagner, where you basically get killed, but it's still not great. And the fifth and final one here is a Russian soldier goes on a long rant complaining about his conditions, calling the war an effing hell and a quote survival quest. As he so very similar to the other guy saying we're just surviving shelling, as he has to eat raw potatoes. His family is not responsive to complaints, with his mother telling him to keep serving if that's what he wanted. There's obviously a bit of family issue going on here, where he must be someone who wanted to go and fight, and then now he's complaining about how sort of horrible it is, and she's like, "Well, you wanted to do it, stop complaining." So yeah, harsh. Uh, Interesting. Always good to get those intercepts, and again, they do appear genuine rather than propaganda. Obviously in Russian, that I mean, they will be put out for propaganda reasons. I mean, this is to give you a sense of you know looking down on the Russian units and soldiers and what's going on, but that doesn't mean they're not true, and it would be highly unlikely that those were acted. Um, but of course, still conceptually possible. Uh, Dmitry then, War Translated, then translates Igor Strelkov, who is the military blogger who has gone to the front line and then came back from the front line because he wasn't really being used and his papers weren't sorted out and whatever. He did it voluntarily, but he was actually in the 2014 Donbass war, in charge of the militia of the separatist states. So he's been very high up, and he's now super critical of the administration, of the decision making, and even of Putin. And there's some tension between him as a ardent military blogger who's saying, we should do things much more harshly than we are actually doing them, and yet throwing a whole bunch of usually fairly accurate criticisms at the administration. He's like speaking truth to power in a way. I mean, he's no great guy. He's horrible, but what he says is pretty much correct. So let's just read you what he says. I was asked an interesting question. The question is: name the main reason why you think that serious successes of the Russian troops in the offensive are currently impossible. So his answer is: of the whole number of reasons that very seriously weaken the combat capability of the Russian armed forces, not only in the offensive but also in defense, I consider the morale factor to be the main one. The majority of mobilized and most of the staff, servicemen of the Russian armed forces have no motivation for sacrifice in the hostilities against the armed forces of Ukraine, since the goals of the war are not only not explained by the authorities, but are not even officially defined at all. At the same time, the disciplinary measures that are at the disposal of the command of the Russian armed forces, quote, according to the laws of peacetime, close quote, are not enough to make military personnel fear them more than death and injury from enemy fire. Accordingly, those with a chance of success are when conducting military operations are volunteer units, of which there cannot be many, Wagner hired units, which have their own, quote, internal ideology, brackets, characteristic of Landsknechts, combined with the most severe repressive discipline that goes beyond even the wartime legislation of the USSR era. Um, Hence the conclusion, the command can conduct a full-fledged offensive against the positions of a staunch and stubborn enemy with, quote, elite units only in very narrow, limited areas. For example, the direction of Solar Bakhmut, where you can conduct military operations without involving other forces, except for the Totenkopf shock troops. If someone does not like this definition, please look at the emblems of Wagner. So he's basically saying that you can get success in these areas where you've got Wagner who are basically afraid of getting shot if they run away. So it's totally harsh. And then they also use their kind of elite shock troops that are very similar to the sort of Nazi German shock troops. And in fact, he's saying that they use similar insignia and stuff. Yeah, so he says in all other areas, these guys can have limited success. Sorry, in these particular areas, they can have limited success, but in all other areas, they're going to struggle. So in all other sectors, he continues, a successful offensive is also theoretically possible, but only if a multiple numerical and, most importantly, technical superiority over the enemy is created, which makes it possible to suppress enemies' will to resist, and an understanding of their own large superiority among the troops is present. However, when faced with the most persistent and professional units of the enemy, even great superiority is no guarantee of great success. And what do we have? And we have, in general, a parity in the number of troops achieved as a result of the autumn under-mobilization. Some superiority in certain types of heavy equipment and artillery, but with an extreme lack of proper reconnaissance and communications equipment, where the enemy as a whole has a significant advantage over our troops. Interesting. Therefore, he says, I believe that if our troops to go on a large-scale offensive in one or several sectors of the front, then due to a combination of insufficient forces with low morale and a very weak disciplinary apparatus, I don't specifically consider the question of the quality of command. Only an even worse condition of the enemy troops can save from defeat. Faced with the staunch and skillful resistance of the enemy, such an offensive will inevitably die out due to the inability of the command to force its troops to go into the battle with the necessary degree of military prowess, which in turn can allow the enemy, if he manages to maintain sufficient reserves, to launch counterattacks and achieve success, perhaps even of operational and strategic nature. So back to me, this is indeed what the Ukrainians are planning on. So let the Russians do their offensive, or at least some theories are that this is what they're planning. Let the Russians do their offensive first, get them to use up all their capacity, and then hit them with a counteroffensive. Last it out, because you have better organization, you're on the defense, and you have a parity in many areas of that defense, including reconnaissance and whatnot. You last out a defense of that attack, and then hit them with a really strong counterattack or counterattacks. So he continues, what needs to be done to change this situation? I had spoken and written about this 100 times already, probably since March of last year. Practically nothing has been done by the highest military and political authorities of the Russian Federation, and is not planned, since the hope for an agreement with partners remains, and the rat does not feel driven into a corner because it is an inadequate state and is unable to objectively assess reality. I mean, this is pretty damning. That's where he sort of ends, or that's where this ends. So he's not hopeful that they are able to succeed, and he's not hopeful that there are changes afoot to allow the Russians to succeed. So this is really damning stuff, and certainly an interesting viewpoint from someone well within the Russian military apparatus. So another one from War Translated, and this is, and I'll just read you the summary here. Hilarious Russian volunteer in LPR MERS explains how expensive Russian electronic warfare equipment works. It's put in the rears to avoid destruction by artillery, and you guessed it, it jams their own Russian equipment. And no one does anything because it's about it because orders. It's a waste of money, says MERS. So they've got this electronic warfare equipment that they have to keep far away from the front, so it can't really effectively jam the Ukrainian equipment well, but ends up jamming their own equipment instead, and no one seems to do anything about it. Incredible. And And then last one here for Warn Translated. Debate on the success of mobilization in the Russian channels today, these are Telegram channels, reveals some hilarious details. Vladan T questions who in Moscow decided to create tank regiments without tanks, mobile battalions without a single truck, and infantry units with only assault rifles. And there's been a lot of complaints going on from inside Russian units and from with Russian analysts saying, why are we training up these artillery units? So they're basically training up people to work artillery and then sending them to the front line as infantry because they've got no other option. And so, A, these are ill-equipped to be those infantry soldiers, and B, they aren't replacing that expertise in artillery because it's kind of needs must in those situations. So, yeah, lots of things evidently going wrong behind the scenes for the Russians, which what happens is the sheer number of troops they have, I think, hides so many problems that the Russians are experiencing. Just they there is, I think, probably in a Russian command structure, maybe an illusion that things are going better than they are because they can just throw bodies at each successive problem. Okay, moving on. So another example of war crime here is Ukraine says another of its hospitals has been looted in the occupied territory. The main hospital in Skadovsk in the Kherson region has had all its equipment removed, taken away in 4 of Russia's military trucks. So here is Russia, as they say, liberating a settlement of people who surely want them to be there, welcoming them with open arms and bunches of flowers and all this kind of claptrap. And saying, we are the good guys. We've come to liberate you from these Nazis and all this kind of rubbish. And then when they think, oh, we've got to get out of here because the Ukrainians are coming, you realize it's not really about these people. It's not really about the people and these settlements that they have supposedly liberated, because they would ransack those hospitals to take equipment elsewhere, and that's equipment that allows those people that they have supposedly liberated to die, to die of their illnesses because they now have no medical facilities. It's just weird and morally abhorrent. Trentelenko here says, I'm sure that ROK, that's Republic of Korea, South Korea, Polish, Turkish, Swedish arms makers will use this against German arms firms in all future NATO arms contracts. Same with the Swiss. So the claim is Germany and Switzerland have solidified their reputation as countries that will sell you a thing and then deny you the use of that thing. I'll talk about this a little more in a second because it appears that that's changed. Who's going to do business with them in light of their moral corruption and service to the genocidal Russian regime? So harsh words there. But the idea is pretty sound, that if Sweden have these kind of have these neutrality laws that stipulate that their arms manufacturers, they've got this arms export industry, yet they also have their neutrality. So it means that if people are actually at war at any point in time, they can't sell them equipment, and they also refuse to allow equipment to be sold on or given on by other nations who they previously sold stuff to. And of course, if people are seeing this and realizing that it hamstrings them for when they buy stuff off the Swiss and or Germans, and they think, well, there's a non-zero chance going forward that I might need to sell this stuff on to a warring nation at a time of need. And if I'm buying it off Switzerland, I won't be able to do that. Then I can buy it off, say, South Korea, and probably cheaper, and be able to sell it on. So it's all about competitive advantage here in terms of economics. You're gonna buy it off someone else. So you can say what you like about neutrality and this and that, but Germany and Switzerland's industrial military complexes, if you like, are going to suffer going forwards in terms of manufacture and export, if they are going to lose out competitively to other people who won't put those stipulations in place. Just not very sensible for them. This is the Swedish CV90 combat vehicle 90. Has many different sort of iterations. Sweden have given 50 of these to Ukraine. Now these have a stabilized gun, and it's just worth watching this. I think it's this video. Yes. So let's have a look at. In fact, let's go to the original YouTube and make it a little bit bigger. So what I want you to do when looking at this is look what happens to the turrets and the cannon, the barrel, as this CV90 goes up and down and bounces over different terrain. Look how well stabilized it is. So you can fix on a target, and it doesn't matter what you're driving over, you can continue to fix on that target and shoot at it repetitively, no matter what's happening with the chassis. Check it out. So up and down, pretty good stabilization there. As it goes around the corner, still stable, not only stabilized, but the rotation of the turret. And this is just fantastic. Dead on, just stays dead on. Nice, so consistent speed over some really significant bumps there. And again, look at what it's doing. It's just showing off how it has a stabilized turret and can keep its aim solid there. So anyway, there's lots more of that, but just a decent bit of kit that's got pretty good respect for an IFV, for an infantry fighting vehicle. And staying on Sweden, they've got a range of Archer artillery systems. Sorry, they've got a bunch of Archer artillery systems that are going to give to Ukraine, and these have really good counter battery fire, apparently. But also they have the ability to have a 60-kilometer range when firing Excalibur, which are precision piece of munition. So it's going to be great because you don't have to have HIMARS, and you can hit some of these smaller targets. Maybe HIMARS missiles might be wasted on that are a long way behind the lines. So normally, maybe with a Caesar, you're going up to 40 kilometers. And Russians will know that, and they'll say, right, there's some Caesars around here, so we'll have to pull things a bit further back or adapt to that. And now it's like 60 kilometers. So it's not just HIMARS that are able to reach beyond those longer ranged artillery systems or artillery pieces, sorry. Although this calls it an artillery system. The Archer can change things up a little bit. And here's a map that shows the range of the Archer, which is pretty significant. I mean, if you're talking about Donetsk, you're going way past Donetsk. I know Donetsk is a city's on the front line, but you're getting almost up to Starobilsk area up here in the um, Luhansk Oblast. Just that's going to be pretty useful. So this Archer system, the Swedish Archer system, which is a wheeled self-propelled gun, is a really useful bit of kit and has quite, again, like the CV90, has there's a lot of respect for it. So let's get on to the old conversation of Leopards here. The US has offered used tanks from its own stockpiles, plus long-term industrial partnership to every European country that can deliver Leopard 2s to Ukraine. German defense industry circles claim each country that accepts a US offer is lost for German defense industry. Uh, so this is a case of America stepping up and saying, right, if Germany aren't going to sort out this kind of leopard thing themselves, we will help persuade countries to give their leopards. And I think there are plenty of countries now that are going to give leopards to Ukraine. There's even training in Poland is starting this week, I believe, for Ukrainian tank crews on the Leopard. Well, actually, this is now made somewhat easier because the Germans have indeed stated that it's going to be fine the for any nation in Europe to give on their leopards, that the export license issue is not a thing, or Germany will waive it essentially. So here we have it. Germany does not mind if other countries supply tanks to Ukraine. This is sort of breaking news at the moment as I record this. German Defense Minister Annalena Baerbock made the statement during a visit to France. So that is huge. That is huge. So now you're going to have leopards able to be given by European nations that are not Germany. There's also talk about Germany maybe they'd done some calculations previously on how many leopards they could give. Something like 19 leopards were available because they're some getting refitted, some are not available to be used because they're not in good enough state. In fact, there's kind of rumors that actually Germany don't really have as many Leopards themselves operational as some had previously thought. Then, to add to that, French President Macron said he did not exclude the supply of French Leclerc tanks to Ukraine and named 3 conditions for this. He did this on TV. So, according to him, the tank should not cause escalation, which is interesting. That's pretty much a subjective prediction. He must provide real and effective support to the Ukrainian army, or they must provide. So they will. They will. Again, that's possibly a subjective prediction, and this should not weaken our own defense. Well, naturally, it will to some point, right? But again, it's a calculation. It's maybe a subjective prediction, but it's going to be a calculation that will also take into account NATO. So, are those things that given those tanks would easily pass as criteria? I think so. I think they would definitely provide real. I mean, depends how many you're talking about. They'll definitely provide real and effective support to the Ukrainian army. Uh, I don't think it causes an escalation because I don't think there can be escalation because there's only nuclear war, right? And I don't think some Leclerc tanks would be a trigger for nuclear war. And this shouldn't weaken their defense because of NATO effectively. So and also they've got a decent enough armed forces, I would have thought, to cope with at least some Leclercs being given. So that's really interesting. You've got Germany and France maybe allowing now that Ramstein's happened, now people have been like, oh, there's not enough main battle tanks. Actually, we might see that there could be enough tanks put together to give a really decent offensive capability for the Ukrainians in what might be a late spring offensive. I don't know whether you could get those tanks over there and training on them and enough logistics sorted out in that time frame. Maybe you can. We shall see. But that's really good news, effectively. Anyway, that's today's Ukraine War Update Extra video. Hopefully that was of use to you and of interest. Please like, subscribe, and share. And all the ways you can do that, you can support my channel down in the description below. Buy me a coffee, YouTube thanks, all those wonderful things. And a massive thanks to my new YouTube channel members. These guys are freaking legends: Mikey Bump, Imre Hadju, Subhero, Robespierre One, Scott Milan, Leah Kroll, Elin Tavir, Andrzej Erdviks, James Cottle, Mark Schwarman, Hans Peter Nielsen, Tyler Crockett, John Lloyd, Memods, Mitch Massarold, Kevin Alexander, Yanis Kilioris, Ian Ratner. Fantastic, really appreciate that. And also the ones over from that are still members from my A-Tippling Philosopher channel, where I migrated from to here. Cynthia Chenot, Lee Dixon, Andrzej Zerdovich, Holly Irving, RNH Endersby, Bo Jansen, John Nairich, Craig Mucklemore, Mitch Mazarol, Vaguely Agnostic, Ricky Johnson, Chindi Chimbler, and Sabra Bursovic. So really appreciate all of these legendary people. It literally does allow me to do what I do. Like without that kind of support, like I pour an inordinate amount of time into this, and I just wouldn't do that without that support. So really is appreciated. Anyway, that's enough like banging on from me. Take care, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.